located, your dam left half's in county X and the right half's in county Y, you may have two phone calls, but assuming that they're not split, the stream doesn't split the county. We had a couple other EAP questions. They were specific to the state. Take a phone call. Well, if you didn't get your nap in under EAPs, we'll try it underneath Section 6, Dam Owner Liability, Public Safety, and Security. In all seriousness, this one's kind of a fun one. Not too much fun because you realize how much liability there exists when you store elevated water, but because it kind of puts some things in perspective. Well, is the engineer just being a little over dramatic? And yeah, maybe. But engineers really aren't that overly dramatic, so maybe not. We're going to briefly discuss legal premise, dam owner negligence, standard of duty, and breach of standard of duty. The definition of strict liability, the dam owner's best defense, public safety liability, and dam security issues. Big caveat. Real briefly, the objectives are a brief discussion on responsibility, standard of duty, strict liability, the public safety responsibility, and some dam safety procedures. I know my next statement is going to seem a little bit hard for some people to swallow, but we do live in a very litigious society. So, unfortunately, if there is a dam failure, and Oroville will point this out, for a serious dam safety incident, and just for clarity, everybody remembers Oroville is the dam in California where the dam didn't fail, but there was an evacuation because of concern. If there is a dam failure or a serious dam safety incident, there is a pretty good chance there's going to be widespread litigation, particularly if it's a catastrophic dam failure. So everybody that's remotely associated with a dam is going to see some paperwork from an attorney. The engineer, dam safety, the owner, the way it goes. So as we were just saying, that those that likely be included in litigation be owners, operators, inspectors, engineers, contractors, state dam safety officials, and if your name even remotely shows up on a piece of paper that you happen to walk by the dam. Maybe a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, but the lawsuits, based on our experience, will claim extensive liability on the part of everyone. It'll be up for the lawyer to decide who is truly liable, but they will do an extensive shotgun approach. So let's talk a little bit about negligence. Negligence is defined as failure to exercise care to avoid failure. And that's it. It's failure to take the reasonable steps to prevent a certain catastrophic item from occurring. For high hazard dams in which there is a loss of life, there is a higher standard of care generally expected of the dam owner because of the documented potential for the loss of life. I think it would be reasonable to conclude that in the state of South Carolina, where we have significant hazard due to the presence of roads, that slightly higher standard of care may apply to significant hazards as well. Maybe not to quite the same degree as high hazard, but to significant hazards. Negligence in any of the following can occur. Design, that'd be the engineer. Operation, inspection, remedial repairs, assuming they were done or needed, construction, regulation, and maintenance. Dam owners, we've said this for a variety of reasons today, and for numerous times throughout the day, are responsible for carrying out inspection of the dam and doing it regularly and completely. Go along with that, to protect yourself from the litigious society, I recommend that you document the inspection. to generally have it stated somewhere that I walked the dam and didn't see any issues on November 9th, that's better than nothing being in the file, I guarantee you. Monitor the conditions regularly. Keep up with the water levels. Notice if your piezometers are changing, assuming those exist, just for your water levels. If the seepage is changing. I know we've talked about this, but from a litigious point of view, this is what will help protect you. I did what I was supposed to do. Maintain the facility. And the toughest of them all is a meet appropriate regulations and standard of care. Going back to the EAP, assuming we have a serious issue with the dam that requires evacuation, having an EAP that is up to date, tested, and has a complete set of records is another measure to reduce your potential liability should there be an issue with the dam. Having something you can lay out front and say, I did what I said I was going to do. The minimum standards of duty are set forth by numerous different items. Statutes. The statutes will be different depending on who your regulatory agency is. For most of you, that's going to be South Carolina Dams and Reservoir Safety Act. Few folks that have FERC-regulated projects that will be set by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, so on and so forth. The regulations is missing a paren are actually defined as the South Carolina Dams and Reservoir Safety Act regulations. Pretty straightforward. That's the regulations that the state has that says these are the minimum standards. That's in addition to the act. In addition to those standards, the standard of duty or the standard of care, if you will also be defined as the professional or industry standards that are in play at the time the incident takes place. It's hard to say they come back and sue you 20 years later, which I'm not saying it's possible to say, well, the technology got better, it doesn't work that way. What happens then? But those standards of care include the Army Corps of Engineers. Pretty good dam design agency. They have a series of documents that's online. I think Randy mentioned it. The NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Here's a ghost. They were the preeminent designer of earth dams, flood control dams in the 60s, 70s, and even into the 80s. Gentlemen in the office or in the crowd who I think designed a bunch of them. But they have documents that are outstanding that set the standard of care of way things should be done. And of course, that's the SCS being renamed the NRCS. And a couple of others would be the United States Bureau of Reclamation, and then not up there is FEMA, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or Federal Emergency Management Agency. You are considered to have breached the standard of duty or standard of care when you do not maintain the standard. I know that seems simple to say. The problem is, an expert can get on the stand and simply say that. You hope for high ethical standards and they would adhere to them. But the truth of the matter is, unfortunately, folks can say things they shouldn't say. But the best thing you have is the documentation. Evidence that supports that you didn't do what you said you're going to do is obviously a breach. Common sense. You obviously disregarded your project as evidenced by lack of maintenance, so on and so forth. It's pretty obvious to identify. And then unfortunately, legal theory, and please don't ask questions on that one. So I'm going to get past the breach of the standard. It must be established causation of damage to injury to the plaintiff. I am sure there's a legal brief that gives a layman's term to that, but in the end, someone's got to believe that they've been truly injured. Obviously, if it's a dam failure, a high hazard dam, and it's been a loss of life, I think proving the injury is pretty straightforward. It gets a little more complicated if it becomes environmental damage and you're saying, well, I put sediment in someone's lake or in someone's stream. that becomes a little bit more difficult to prove, assuming that you don't have true physical damages. Obviously, if the dam were to fail and the road were washed out or utilities were damaged, that's pretty easy to point out. So, as we just stated, damages include loss of life, personal injury, emotional distress. That's the one that, who decides whether they had emotional distress or not? Property value, restoration or replacement cost, and diminished value. So your liability from public safety. You may be liable if you fail to warn the public. That's simple. Assuming that you should have known or did know that a dangerous condition existed. So if you have a concrete spillway and you don't have no trespassing or no skateboarding and yet sign's not up there, I know it sounds simple, but that comes down to the statement of having a attractive nuisance on your property. A lake unto itself can be considered an attractive nuisance to some people. I want to go fish. You're not welcome to fish. It's a private lake. So sign simple as no trespassing may be something that's worth putting up. I know it seems silly, but you can also be liable if you fail to construct or maintain the structure in good repair. See if I can do that again. Pretty straightforward. You must be able to document and identify that you've corrected the situation or warned them a situation exists. And the one that seems to be getting a lot of folks are these low-head dams. I think Randy recently mentioned this. I don't know, you're talking about a low-head dam real quick. These are these run-of-the-river dams. They're 10 to 20 feet tall. And when the water goes over them, there's a roller that forms in the back. And the technical term is a hydraulic jump. What happens is boats go into that. And because of several different hydraulic phenomena, you can't get out. Well, people have gone over them because they want to dive off the dam. It's considered, people have now said you should be warning the public this is a dangerous situation. I think other folks would say that you should know it's a dangerous situation, but whether it was posted or not seems to be the legal definition. In the end, though, you do not have to insure against the danger. You just simply have to act reasonably and notify. So if they trespass in that one situation, at least legally, now I can't tell you what the jury's going to do or anything else, but at least legally, you have a leg to stand on, so to speak. Courts do recognize, thank goodness, that people are sometimes injured and that the certain person or agency is not always at fault. So, last item as we move on from this is owners and operators are obligated to inspect all facilities in adjoining areas. We've touched on this many times. This just comes into, it is your responsibility to inspect and maintain your dam. That's what it comes down to. A quick story, won't name the innocent or the guilty, but unfortunately we were the expert witness on the death of a couple of children. We were not the cause, we were simply providing some analysis. The mother claimed that the children were washed away due to the fault of the dam owner. We actually were able to prove that the dam owner did everything they should have done. The point that this gets to, though, is children are unable to understand the danger of certain conditions. My two certainly do, or don't care. So signs are not going to be enough. So owners and operators do have a somewhat greater responsibility for the safety of the children. I don't know how you deal with that exactly. Bluntly, I mean, that's one of those cases you really got to get an attorney involved. At some point, the parents have to be involved. So, for a liability to exist, injury must have occurred, dangerous conditions must have existed, negligent or wrongful action. In other words, you failed to do maintenance, you failed to notify, and you either had the knowledge or should have had the knowledge and did not do anything about it. Make sure you keep the premises safe. Avoid conditions that could injure even trespassers. Seems a little bit unfair, but that is the case. And to the extent possible, correct existing and dangerous conditions and post warnings. That's your key, post warnings. For inspections to meet public safety requirements, they must be conducted at frequent intervals. SCD does have recommended intervals. So do NRCS and the Bureau and everybody else. So if you can adhere to them and stick with them, I think that puts you in a better situation. Conducted at a time when normal conditions are likely to have changed. So you have your standard interval, and then you're talking about post-floods, post-earthquakes, whatever the case may be. And then going along with the inspection is document your corrective actions. Make sure you have a record of what you did to fix the situation. Similarly, if you do have an accident, whatever it may be, document the accident, document the corrective action. All right. The most common hazardous areas around dams are your spillways, your spillway basins, the outlet works, which would be the riser tower, and any other place we have moving water in essence. The downstream slope in Merthen Dam at 3 to 1 is not overly dangerous, thank goodness. Other areas that may be, if you have a concrete gravity dam specifically, you've seen the example that Randy put up where you had the dam was vertical, especially for a concrete dam. Failure to have handrails, appropriate signage would be considered a hazard. Power lines, swimming beaches, also. Those are typically less common for smaller dams. As I said at the beginning, you do need signs. Signage is, in essence, your saving grace. They should warn of the hazard, explain how to avoid, and the consequences to fail to avoid. There it is. Fencing. On that photo, it would be appropriate to make the following statement. Depending on the size of the reservoir and whether or not the public can access the reservoir, warning buoys upstream of this dam or spillway, as the case may be, a small boat that was fishing that lost power or lost track of what they're doing could make an unfortunate trip in the wrong direction. Having a log boom or safety boom would be an appropriate way to mitigate your risk on a project of that nature. That's similar to labyrinth weir spillways or any open channel spillway that someone could readily go over. No, we said fencing again. Similar in the background. Labyrinth weir, water spilling over. This is obviously under new construction. Boat were to get up close to that without appropriate signage could be an issue. If you have a road over top of your dam, even if it's not a state, county, local road, guardrails or other methods to restrict vehicular access, obviously it's a private dam on your private property. It's a different issue. Floating barriers, which we just talked about, safety ladders. I'm going to tell you safety ladders present two issues. You have them for a means to get out of a steep area. Guess what it gives you as a means to get in the steep area? I don't know how to answer that one, to be honest with you. I understand the need that you got to find access to get out. You know the rest of that story. So, typically speaking, you're going to have plunge pools as opposed to impact basins. But I'm telling you, this is a bad place to be. Is if for whatever reason that pipe were to charge and you're between that pipe and that wall, whoever that is going to have a real bad day. So having applicable fencing or appropriate fencing even down the side of this channel would be appropriate. The same thing would apply to a plunge pool. That plunge pool is basically designed to go to the theoretical depth of scour. So that means for a 48-inch pipe, you're talking about an excavation depth that's probably approaching 6 to 8 feet before you ever hit riprap. Kids that can't swim or whatever the case may be, thinking they're in a safe position, that's not a good place. Fencing may be appropriate, especially in high traffic areas. Also recognize during high flow conditions that fencing could be damaging and may be subject to need for repair. Railing around risers. Honestly, I would rather see a good trash rack. I think it accomplishes the exact same goal. There are some very specific risers out there that are not real common anymore. If you have one, I welcome the chance to speak with you. One of them is called a Morning Glory Spillway. It's basically an OG that's 360 degrees. If you ever see one, it will freak you out because it looks like there's a hole in the water. I mean, it literally looks like a hole in the water. If you have one of those, let's talk offline. But for the rest of them, I think you're better off to have an appropriate trash rack as opposed to a handrail. We did talk about floating barriers. Here's an example. There's your protection right there. Where'd you take that one? Anyways, another example of floating barriers. Floating barriers are actually appropriate also upstream if you have a riser, even if it has a trash rack. Keeping people generally away from your dam is a good idea, assuming that you can't control access to the entire body of the lake. Dam security. Okay. This is getting to be a bigger and bigger and bigger item. I don't know how many folks in the room, and I'm not going to ask for a roll call or anything like that, but if you have a dam that you have items that are controlled by the internet, I suggest you contact someone other than me to make sure that it cannot be reasonably accessed via the internet. Depending on the agency, some of them actually require positive disconnects and you only hook it back up when you want to make a change. In other words, there's enough concern that people can activate spillway gates remotely, so you actually literally have a physical disconnect only when you want to operate the gate and you plug it back in. I'm not enough of an internet guy to say whether that's really an issue or not. If you live in a public area, consider physical security. In other words, limiting access where you want the boats to go in, assuming your lake or your impoundment is public access. We just talked about cyber security. We've talked about personal security, information security. If you're dealing with a dam that happens to be regulated by FERC, it is considered critical energy infrastructure, and they do not want it released for a variety of reasons. And to some extent or another, I would generally recommend that you don't just make all your dam information generally available to the public. The key stuff, the dam breach inundation map, it's going to be out there. Real quick, I don't think we need to spend much time on security. There's the definition. Condition that results from the establishment and maintenance of protective measures that ensure a state of resistance from hostile acts. So why do you need to secure your dam? Public health and safety, public confidence, government, critical function, infrastructure, and the environment. Assuming that most of these are fairly small, it's going to be the first one and the second one. Public confidence is less of an issue. Most of these are not going to be water supply. There's your potential security threats. Terrorism, disgruntled employees, unauthorized operation. I think that one's probably the biggest one. Randy mentioned removing your gate wheel so people can't play with the gate and drain your lake and flood people downstream. When you remove your gate operator, make sure you know where you put it or lock it. That's another mechanism. Chain it so it can't be operated. Keep in mind these are attractive nuisances. We talked about those briefly. Kids throwing stones down piezometers or cleanouts for drains. Neighbor disputes, I have seen that a time or two where two people are complaining or fighting over who's responsible for what and are willing to do damage to the other person's property. Unfortunately, it happens. Most of the projects here probably are not going to be overly subject to terrorism. You never know. There is the National Homeland Security Act of 2002. It does discuss infrastructure protection. It may be good bedtime reading. Critical asset to facility to destruction or compromise would result in a high consequence event. Saluda Dam certainly fits that. Others may or may not fall in the critical assets that still need to be protected and from generalized unauthorized access. So, some other information that are available, I'm not going to read these, but they'll be available in the CD. 4 categories of security: physical, cyber, personnel, and information. All these discuss means to control physical access, cyber access, personal access, or information. Your risk applies to all of those. What is risk? Oh boy, it's the new buzzword. No, I'm just kidding. Risk is the probability that an undesirable act or event could occur. Now, that risk also applies to storms and everything else, but we're specifically talking about risk from unauthorized accident at the moment. But we're going to kind of explain that, it's going to compound that a little bit. And what I mean by that is, so we've talked about specifically the risk of your project creating damage downstream. We're also going to talk about that as it includes a storm or a earthquake or another natural event occurring. So risk is the consequence times vulnerability times the threat. So your consequence would be the loss from the undesirable event, the vulnerability that would happen. Here it specifically says adversary, but the probability that an earthquake would occur also would take place. The risk process is determine the consequence of an adverse event, loss of life, economic, assuming that the reservoir was used to provide drinking water, that would obviously come into economic impact. Determine the vulnerabilities associated. So, common vulnerabilities would be failure of the gates, hydroelectric facilities, damage to the freeboard, and then damage to the inlet and outlet structures. From a terroristic point of view, the saving grace is while there has been research done by the Corps of Engineers on how much explosive it would take to damage one of these facilities, generally speaking, earth dams are hard to damage from terroristic activities, not impossible, hard. But you can damage the gates, you can damage the outlet works, you can do other things with the dam itself. We've talked about instrumentation is certainly able to be damaged, whether that be your monitoring well or your cleanout. If you can get inside the structure, which we haven't talked a whole lot about and probably will stay away from, inspection galleries, which are basically tunnels inside of a concrete gravity dam, if you can get inside of that, then that's a problem. They're generally controlled access locations anyways. And then gate controls and SCADA systems. So if you continue the risk process, conduct a threat assessment, including external and internal, and then contact local law enforcement. That is the most important thing you need to realize as relatively small dam owners in the grand scheme of things. If you believe you have a risk to your project that is not something you can control, in other words, putting a padlock on it, I suggest you call local law enforcement. That is the biggest item. I have unauthorized access. This is a private dam. It's got a fence, it's got a gate, or whatever the case may be. Call the cops. Available tools, there they are. RAMD was common about 10 years ago. FERC's risk to informed decision making is a pretty common ground now. Corps of Engineers risk model is also one if you think it's necessary for the projects in which you're involved. Physical security. Pretty straightforward. Methods to keep people from accessing. We touched on this. If your project is in a location that does not require access by the public, I do suggest you keep them away. Fences prevent access, delay their access. You can put up barriers, you can put up surveillance cameras, put up signage. But people are up there going, good night, do we really need all this stuff? Depends on the size of your project. There are projects that do require it, there's projects that do not require it. Word response, depending on location, there are some HOAs that have their own police. They should be able to access the site. Mitigate the adverse effects of high consequence acts by having heavy equipment, replacement parts, etc. INTAS, National Terrorism Advisory System. There's a bulletin that describes the elevated alerts, generally for projects not going to be exposed. If you want to talk about security plans, the data is on the CD. We certainly can go through it. If anybody has a specific discussion they'd like to have about the security plan, when you elevate, similar to an EAP, the concept is similar. But it goes through the whole process of informing employees, maintaining contact with law enforcement, restricting access. We touched on cybersecurity. I know it sounds odd, but there really have been some instances where they say you can access someone's home security through your thermostat. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not an IT person. Cybersecurity for dams is specifically more for electrical generation and transmission, water level measurements, and physical access. So in other words, if you have automated gate systems, if you don't have automated gates and you're not monitoring your water level via the internet, and you're not on an electrical transmission grid, probably not a big issue. And the available cybersecurity tools are listed in case your project is in need of access or creating cybersecurity. That is a whole different ballgame. Personal security, personnel security. If you're hiring folks, we strongly recommend, as does Homeland Security, that you do a background check, credit check, drug testing, so on and so forth, to make sure folks that have access to your dam meet your minimum qualifications. Insider threat seems to be the largest of the issues. So by following those procedures, you're better off and you limit the threat to the project. Going a little deeper, prevent and prepare. The biggest way is to segregate duties. Similar to EAPs, you would have security threat plans, and you would validate them and test them, and you would document past incidents. Similar to the EAP is you do have a response and recovery phase, and that's intended to limit damage and to minimize downtime should an impact occur and minimize economic consequences. Information security, we're just about done for those. Let's put them to sleep. Information security is what we were talking about briefly. FERC does actually limit access to certain information. It should be determined what needs to be in everybody's hands versus what needs to be in the public's hands, specifically for dams. I know it seems a little odd, but there are information sharing mechanisms. The State Dam Safety Office can control what's released. They do have, is it FOIA in South Carolina, or do you have, because Georgia has to be different, called GORA, Georgia Open Records Request. So that's able to control the access. There's only released once a request is made and it's deemed a legitimate request. There's a dam portal that you can actually use for providing secure data on dams. My guess is this will be the first and the last time you'll see it. Reporting an incident. It's common sense. I know it seems simple, but if people are taking pictures of your project, and they shouldn't be, either report them or have them leave. Or better yet, have the police have them leave. Report suspicious activity if you have a large enough project or your project is considered critical infrastructure to local law enforcement, Homeland Security, FBI. Typical suspicious activities are attempted breach, misrepresentation to access, cyber attack, photography, observation of the site. Certainly not going to name them all. Homeland Security does provide brochures and information on suspicious activity. You do need to provide an accurate report. And this is important. I've kind of gone through a lot of items rather quickly, but if you do have a project and you are monitoring security and you want to file a report, please make sure it's accurate. And the reason for that is if you have a project and they're monitoring it, then there's a pretty good chance that the same folks are monitoring something else, assuming that it's a legitimate threat. So make sure you're reporting the information accurately and timely. Some reporting tools or procedures are provided at the following locations. Don't everybody go to it all at once to crash the website. I know you got your cell phones out. Includes a reference library. Continued reference information.